I left before they cut the cake, my own daughter's cake. I remember the weight of that ballroom. 320 guests, white tablecloths catching the light from a chandelier somebody had flown in from Montreal. The quartet was working through something soft near the bar. My son-in-law's father was standing about 10 feet from me. In a suit he'd pressed himself that morning in a motel room off the highway. Because that's what the man did. He pressed his own suits. And 3 words came over a live microphone in front of everyone who mattered to 2 families. Something in me went very still. Not angry. Not yet. I want to tell you about that stillness. Because what I did next cost me the future I thought I was building for my daughter's happiness. And what happened after gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. If this is your first time here, leave your city and your local time in the comments. I read every single one. Let me take you back to the second Saturday in June. The morning of the day I nearly let the worst mistake of my life happen to my own child. I grew up outside Moose Jaw, on a grain operation my father ran with his brother, and I spent most of my life building a different kind of business. Heavy equipment leasing, the unglamorous kind, cranes and excavators that sit in a yard in Regina collecting prairie dust until somebody needs to move earth. My wife passed when our daughter Kaylee was 19. I raised her the back half of her life mostly alone, and I am not a man who talks much. I drive a 2011 F-150 with a dent in the tailgate I never bothered fixing. I drink my coffee black at 5:30 in the morning at the kitchen table, and I read the actual newspaper, the Leader Post, because the internet version never feels like reading to me. We weren't poor. The bills got paid. Kaylee went to a good school in Regina, then on to Queens for her business degree. When she needed something, it was there. When she asked for something foolish, I'd look at her over the paper and say nothing, and that was answer enough. There's a moment I've turned over a lot since all this happened. She would have been about 16. Somebody had invited me to a Chamber of Commerce dinner downtown, a black tie thing at the Hotel Saskatchewan, the kind where men in suits go to feel important. I looked at the invitation, set it on the counter and said, "I don't go in for that anymore, kiddo." That was it. No explanation. She didn't ask either. There was a drawer in my office at home that locked. She noticed it 100 times growing up. Never saw it open. I was the most private man she knew. She used to think that was just who I was. She was wrong. I was wrong, letting her believe that for so long. She met Trevor Aldous at a leadership conference in Calgary a few years back. He was sharp, asked questions nobody else thought to ask, laughed at the right moments, and had this way of taking something complicated and finding the plain truth underneath it. I liked him fast. She liked him for months before she told me. They dated almost a year before she brought him home to Regina. It went fine. I shook his hand, asked him 2 questions about his work, then went back to my paper. He told her later I seemed reserved. She said that's just how I am. Then she took him to meet his family. His people lived in Mount Royal, in Calgary, the kind of neighborhood where every house has a triple garage and a landscaping crew that shows up Thursdays. His father, Graham Aldous, ran a commercial real estate portfolio downtown. His mother, Pauline, ran the house, and as far as I could tell, most of Graham's social calendar too. The first time Pauline met me was at a dinner I'd just as soon forget. I pulled up in the F-150. Her eyes landed on the truck for half a second. Not a long look, nothing she'd ever admit to. And then she smiled at me. I filed that away and kept walking. 18 months after they started dating, Trevor proposed. They set the wedding for the following autumn, at a hotel out by the lake near Canmore. Somewhere in that stretch, I quietly passed on a chance to expand the leasing business into the Maritimes. Better margins, real growth, the kind of opportunity I'd spent 30 years positioning for. I told myself it was because Kaylee needed me close while she planned things. She never asked me to stay. She also never told me to go. I told myself it was a choice. I hadn't worked out yet that it was a test, and I was failing it on purpose because I didn't want to know the answer. The Aldous house was the kind of place that made you straighten your collar walking in. Vaulted ceilings, framed photographs arranged on the wall in a way that looked casual and clearly wasn't. A kitchen island big enough to land a Cessna on. Pauline had set the table with real candles for what was supposed to be a quiet Tuesday dinner. I noticed that right away. Quiet Tuesday dinners don't need candles. Pauline started in before the bread came out. What did I do for a living? How long had I done it? What was the growth trajectory? She wasn't hostile about it. Her voice stayed warm, her smile never slipped. But the questions had a shape to them, like an intake form you fill out to see if you qualify for something. Graham talked mostly about wine. He had opinions on what we were drinking, showed me the label, didn't ask me a single thing about myself. About 20 minutes in, Pauline turned the conversation to family, asked about my late wife. I told her she'd passed when Kaylee was young, that I'd raised her mostly on my own. Pauline made a small practice sound, the kind that's sympathy on the surface and a checkbox underneath. Then she asked what I'd done before retiring. I said I had a business. A short pause. She lifted her wine glass. I see, she said, 2 words perfectly polite. Everyone at that table understood exactly what she meant by them. Davis, Trevor's older brother, 36, broad-shouldered, a handshake like he was closing a deal, caught my eye and gave a small smile. The kind people give when they want you to know they're in on something you aren't. Kaylee changed the subject, mentioned a restaurant she'd been to recently. The conversation moved on. I let it move on. That was my first mistake. It didn't stop after that dinner. Over the following months, Pauline had a gift for landing small cuts in public. At a friend's engagement party, she introduced my daughter and me to someone she knew. And this is Kaylee's father, Walter. Such a simple, hardworking man. She said it like a compliment. It wasn't. Graham was worse, in a different way. He didn't bother wrapping it. At a barbecue at their place, toward the end of summer, a knot of men were standing around the grill talking shop, and I heard him say, loud enough to carry, Kaylee's always been independent. Picked herself a solid working fellow. Not exactly what we pictured, but... And he just let the sentence hang there. The men around him nodded along. I didn't say anything that afternoon, but that night I sat down with my daughter and told her plainly, if your in-laws keep talking about me that way, I need to know you'll say something. Not for my sake, for your own. She looked at me across the kitchen table, and her face was careful, not defensive, not dismissive. The careful look you wear when you already know the answer but you're not ready to say it. I'll handle it, Dad, she said. I want to be clear about something. I didn't stay quiet because I'm a man who lets things slide. I stayed because I'd raised a daughter alone for 15 years, and the least I could do was give her a fair shot at building something with the man she loved before I decided it couldn't work. I gave her that chance. But I'd drawn a line. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. I should have. The bridal shower was about 30 women at the Aldous house a Saturday afternoon. Catered food. Flowers everywhere, the whole production. I came because that's what family does, even fathers at a bridal shower, hovering near the edge of the room. I wore a sport coat and slacks, shined my shoes. I stood near my daughter's side of the family, off to the edge, watching the way I watched the evening news, patient, taking it all in, not reacting. Pauline found me inside the first 10 minutes. Walter, she said, loud enough for the cluster of women near her to hear. Do you need someone to run you home later? We could arrange it. She said it with a wide smile, the kind that comes preloaded with its own justification. She was being helpful. She was being considerate. Wasn't she being generous? I looked at her for a moment. I'm fine, Pauline, I said. Thanks for the concern. That was it. No edge in my voice, nothing moving in my face. I didn't explain that I'd driven myself. Didn't mention the truck. I just answered and let the silence after my answer do whatever it needed to do. Pauline blinked once and turned away. I could see, even from across the room, that my calm had bothered her more than an argument would have. Later that afternoon, I noticed a man I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, well-dressed, one of Graham's business contacts, looking at me from across the room. Not a hostile look, more like someone trying to place a face he'd seen before. He pulled out his phone, seemed to think better of it, and put it away. On the drive home, I asked my daughter if it had registered with her, what Pauline had done. They don't know me, kiddo, I said. That's their problem, not mine. I didn't fully understand what I meant by that, not yet. A week before the wedding, I drove to the Aldous place to pick up Kaylee. I came in through the side door. She'd given me a key months earlier and heard voices from the kitchen. The door was half open. I wasn't trying to listen, but voices carry Pauline's. You could still call this off. Hunter Whitlock is the better match, you know that. A pause, Kaylee. Mom, the wedding's in a week, Pauline. Exactly, there's still time. I stood in the hallway a few seconds. Then I walked back out the side door and sat in my truck. Here's what I knew about the Whitlocks. Old Calgary oil money, gone into commercial development 2 generations back. Exactly the kind of family Pauline had been angling toward for years. I'd heard the name in passing once or twice. A son, Hunter, Western University business grad, now running part of his father's company. Never thought much of it. I sat in that truck for 20 minutes. Went through everything. what I'd heard, what it meant, what I was going to do with it. And then I made the worst decision of the whole year. I went back in, knocked at the door, and pretended I'd just arrived. I want to be honest about why I did that. I wasn't afraid of a fight. I stayed quiet because I needed to know if Kaylee was in on it, or if she was just trying to manage her mother. I thought I'd find out at the wedding. Thought I'd see, in the moment that mattered, which way she'd lean. I gave her one more week's benefit of the doubt. I should have known by then. Some answers don't need proof. The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant in Mount Royal. White walls, low light. The kind of place where the menu doesn't print prices because the people eating there don't ask. Pauline had picked it. She mentioned twice in the first 20 minutes, and once more after the appetizers, that she and Graham were covering the bill. I arrived on time, wore my one good suit, the navy one, double-breasted, the one that lived in a dry cleaner bag at the back of the closet. I looked good. Better than good, honestly. I looked like a man who didn't need to dress for anybody, but had taken the trouble anyway. Graham greeted us near the door. Looked at me, nodded once, shook my daughter's hand. Not mine, just a nod. I noticed it. Trevor noticed too. I caught his eyes flick to my face, checking. My expression didn't change. Partway through dinner, Pauline stood to say a few words. Thanked the venue, thanked the guests, said nice things about Trevor. Then she turned slightly toward the end of the table where I was sitting, and said, with a warm smile doing a lot of work, "And we're so glad Kaylee's father could join us. Walter, it's wonderful you made the trip in." As if I'd traveled from somewhere difficult, as if my presence required acknowledgement the way a generous donation does. Under the table, my daughter found my hand, held it a second. I didn't look at her. I picked up my fork and kept eating. If you've ever sat at a table and felt like someone you love was being talked about instead of talked to, I want to hear it. Leave it in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. This story has a long way to go, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Pauline caught me near the coat check at the end of the night, looked at me with a practiced kind of concern. "I just want tomorrow to go smoothly for everyone," she said. "Your side might feel a little overwhelmed by the kind of guests we'll have. If you could keep that in mind." I looked at her a moment. "I've never embarrassed anyone in my life," I said. She smiled. "Of course." I didn't sleep that night. Lay on top of the sheets in my hotel room, staring at the ceiling, trying to work out if I was doing the right thing. Not the wedding specifically. Everything. The way I'd let things drag on this long. The way I kept drawing lines in my head and moving them every time someone got close. At 1 a.m, I called Trevor's father. He picked up on the second ring. "You're still awake?" he said. "Doesn't surprise me, just checking." "Yeah," I said. We didn't talk about anything important for a few minutes. He asked if my hotel room was comfortable. I said it was fine. Then I asked him what I'd been carrying around all day. "Are you all right with all this?" A pause. I could hear the TV on low in his room down the hall. Some nature program. Something about the ocean. "I'm fine, son," he said. "They're not kind to you." "No," he said, "they're not." "And that doesn't bother you?" "Not quite a question," he answered anyway. "People show you who they are," he said. "I've seen enough of it not to let it land anymore." I didn't have anything to say to that. Before we hung up, he said something I've turned over a lot since. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you don't owe anybody your dignity. Remember that." I said goodnight. Lay there another hour in the dark, running his words back through my head. He'd said whatever happens. Not no matter what they say. Like he'd already planned something. I told myself he was just being a father. I was wrong about that too. He and I shared a room at the hotel, a suite they'd held for the groom's side. He was already up when I came out of the bedroom, standing at the bathroom mirror, knotting his tie. Rented suit, white shirt, the same shined shoes from the bridal shower. He looked completely at ease, hands steady. Same expression he always wore, open, unhurried, like he was waiting for something he already knew was coming. "You good, Dad?" I asked. "Always," he said. He caught my eye in the mirror while I fixed my own knot. "You love her?" he asked. "Yeah. Then do what you need to do today." Not what anybody else needs. I didn't know what to do with that sentence. I just nodded. My phone buzzed. Davis Aldous. "Heads up, Pauline wants your dad seated toward the back. Less visible." Her words. "Figured you should know." I read it twice. Davis had sent it the particular way some people do. Not to help you, but to watch what you do with it. To be part of what happened next without any of the responsibility. I put the phone in my jacket pocket and didn't answer. My father, Trevor's father, the man I'm calling Dad here because that's who he was to me by then, the only father I had left, was standing at the window looking out at the parking lot. I should stop here and be honest with you about something, because keeping it straight matters to the rest of this. I am the groom. The wedding was mine. The father being humiliated that day was my own father, Walter Aldous. And Trevor isn't a name in this story at all. I conflated something a moment ago, and I want to set it right before I go further, because you deserve a story that holds together. My name's Davis. No, let me just tell it clean. I'm the one getting married. My father's name is Walter. He raised me in a town outside Moose Jaw, ran a heavy equipment leasing yard in Regina his whole working life, drove a dented F-150, read the paper at the kitchen table at 5:30 every morning. My mother passed when I was 19, and he raised me the rest of the way alone. I met my fiancée, Brielle Hargrove, at a leadership conference in Calgary. Her parents, Graham and Pauline, lived in Mount Royal. Her brother Davis was the one who texted me at the hotel. That's the cast. That's the truth of it. Now back to where we were. My father reached into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled something out, a plain white envelope, legal-sized, slightly worn at the corners. He looked at it for a moment, not long, then folded it once and put it back. Ready? He asked. Yeah, I said. We went downstairs. I never asked about the envelope. I wish I had asked sooner. The ballroom at the Lakeside Hotel near Canmore held 320 people, and that day it was full. White chairs in long rows, floral arrangements taller than me, a string quartet near the entrance. The kind of room that makes everything feel formal before anything's even happened. I found out where they'd seated my parents when I walked in with the wedding party. 9th row, left side, half blocked by a marble column. From that angle you could see the altar fine. From the altar, you'd have to look for them. The Hargroves sat front row. I stood at the altar, looked at that column, and something in me went quiet. Not anger, something calmer. That feeling you get when you've been telling yourself a story about a person and suddenly understand the story was never true. The ceremony started. The quartet played. Brielle came down the aisle on her father's arm, looking beautiful, and I kept my face exactly where it needed to be. During the ring exchange, Graham leaned toward Pauline and said something. Quiet, but not quiet enough. Two women in the second row glanced at each other. I caught one word. Trucker. Pauline smiled, and I saw him again. That man from the bridal shower. I'd later learn his name was Desmond Cale, though I didn't have a name for him yet. He was seated near the stage with a cluster of Graham's business associates. Looked at my father. Really looked. The way you look at someone you're trying to place. Pulled out his phone, held it a beat like he was deciding something, then put it away again. He'd already made his decision. He just didn't know yet what it was. The reception started the way these things do. The room filled with noise, glasses went up. The band shifted from ceremony music into something with a little more groove to it. 320 people talking at once creates a kind of pressure in a room. Presses against your chest. My parents found their table. I watched my father pull out my mother's. No, I watched him pull out the chair for the woman beside him. My stepmother, Lorraine, who'd been with him 11 years by then, steady and quiet in her own right. She sat, smoothed her jacket. Two people at a table of strangers, perfectly composed. Pauline went first. Stood by the microphone near the head table and talked for about 6 minutes. Talked about the Hargrove family, their history in Calgary, their values, what Brielle meant to them. She was good at this. Her voice carried weight. People listened. She didn't mention my parents once. Walter and Lorraine, the groom's family, didn't exist inside Pauline's 6 minutes. Graham followed with something shorter. Said I was a hard worker, said the family was thrilled to welcome me in. Said hard worker the way some men say it. Not as a compliment, but as a category. The way you'd describe something useful that doesn't require much more thought. Polite applause. I stood to take the microphone, planning to say something simple. Thank everyone, move things along. Pauline didn't step back. Oh, we're not quite finished, she said, still holding the mic. Her smile hadn't changed. She was looking at someone near the back of the room. I followed her eyes. She was looking at my father's table. I'd seen that smile before, in the kitchen doorway, at the rehearsal dinner. She wore it when she'd already decided something, and it was arriving right on schedule. I went very still. The band stopped playing. Maybe someone signaled them. Maybe they just felt the shift in the room. Either way, the music cut, and the silence after it had weight. Pauline turned slightly toward my father's table, held the mic easy, like something she'd been carrying for years. I want to say something about the Aldous family, she began. Her voice was warm and thoughtful, the voice of someone giving a toast at a charity gala. Walter comes from very simple beginnings, and I'm sure he did his best for his son. She paused, let it land, then turned to the woman beside her, one of her friends from the club, someone I'd met twice and never quite caught the name of, and said, still into the microphone, voice unchanged, "That's not really a father, just trash that wandered in." A handful of people laughed, short reflexive sounds. A large part of the room went quiet, the particular silence of 320 people deciding what to do with something they'd just heard. I turned to Brielle. She was staring at the table. Then, as if she felt me looking, she glanced up. Our eyes met for half a second, and at the corner of her mouth, something small and involuntary, just a flicker, a smile. She looked away from me immediately. I looked at my father. He hadn't moved, hands flat on the table. His face was… I don't have words for it that aren't too small. He looked like a man who'd already decided, long before that moment, that other people's cruelty wasn't something that required a response. My stepmother had a cloth napkin pressed to her mouth. I pushed my chair back and stood up. 320 people watched me cross that room. Nobody said anything. The room had that tension where everyone can feel something is happening, but nobody knows which way it's going to break yet. I walked to where Pauline stood. She was still holding the mic. I held my hand out and she gave it to me, not because she wanted to, but because the momentum of the moment made it the only logical thing left to do. I turned and faced the room. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," I said. "I mean that." A pause, long enough to take its own shape. But I'm not going to stand here and listen to someone talk about my father that way. Not in front of 300 people, not anywhere. I turned to Brielle. She was gripping the edge of the table. "I asked you once what you'd do if your family ever crossed that line. You said you'd handle it. Trevor, don't do this." You smiled, Brielle. She didn't answer. "This wedding is done." I set the mic down on the table beside me, didn't drop it, didn't throw it, said it. The way you put something down when you're finished using it. Then I did the hardest thing in that room. I didn't say anything else. No explanation, no argument, no attempt to make Pauline understand, because Pauline was never going to understand, and I was done spending my time on that. Somebody near the back said something low. A chair scraped. One of the bridesmaids made a small, sharp sound. I wasn't angry. I was clear. Those are different things. It took me years to understand that difference, and it turned out to matter more than anything else that happened in that room. Graham stood up from his seat. "You can't do this." He pointed at me. The gesture of a man who spent his life telling people what to do. "Do you have any idea what this is? Sit down." "Sit down," I said, calm, even. He didn't sit. Pauline stepped forward, still composed, though barely. "Trevor, you're making a scene. Sit down and we'll talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about." I turned. My father was standing. He'd gotten up without any fuss. No dramatic shove of the chair, no announcement. Just standing, jacket straight, face calm. Lorraine had a hand on his arm. I looked at him across the room. He looked at me. "Let's go, Dad." He held my gaze a moment, then nodded. Once, simply. The way he nodded when something was decided and didn't need more discussion. He came around the table, walked past Pauline without looking at her. Not out of contempt. There was simply nothing there that required his attention. We headed for the exit. Lorraine followed, holding her small clutch, the napkin still in her other hand. 320 people watched us walk out. The room started finding its rhythm again behind us. Chairs turning, voices low and urgent, people leaning into each other. In the middle of it, Pauline Hargrove stood near the head table with a microphone she no longer held and a room she no longer controlled. I didn't look back at her. Near the stage, at the table with Grammy's business contacts, Desmond Cale stood up, watched my father pass, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The hallway outside the ballroom was carpeted and quiet. The sounds of the reception came through muffled behind the closed double doors. We stood near the elevator bank, my father, Lorraine, and me, waiting in that particular silence people share after walking out of somewhere and not yet deciding what comes next. Lorraine spoke first, said my name, just my name. "I know," I said. The elevator button stayed lit. I watched the number above the doors count down. "Excuse me." The voice came from behind us. Quick footsteps on the carpet. We turned. The man from the ballroom, the one who'd been watching my father. He was breathing a little fast, like he'd come in a hurry. "Walter Aldous?" My father turned, looked at the man for half a second, the way he looked at everything, taking it in without reacting. "Desmond," he said. They knew each other. Desmond Cale stopped a few feet away, glanced at me, then back at my father. "I'm sorry to bring this up here. I didn't want to say anything in there. but I've sat on the advisory board for your fund for 4 years. I didn't realize you. He paused. I didn't know your son was getting married. Didn't connect it until tonight. My father said, "This is my son." Desmond turned to me, put his hand out. Desmond Kale. I run Whitehorn Capital Partners out of Calgary. Your father is our largest silent partner. We're talking somewhere north of $400 million under his management. I shook his hand. I'm not sure what my face was doing. What? I said. My father was watching me. There are things you never needed to know, son, he said. Until now. We moved down the hall, away from the elevators, to a sitting area near a window. Lorraine sat. My father stood. Desmond apologized and excused himself a moment later. Said he had my father's number and would follow up. Then it was the three of us. My father told me everything. He'd started the leasing company in 1989, 2 years before I was born. Built it out of one rented yard and a single crane truck. Ran it quietly for almost 30 years. No press, no industry profile, no awards on the wall. He never wanted any of that. In 2017, he sold the operation to a private equity group out of Toronto for a number he said out loud exactly once, because I was his son and had a right to know. $410 million. After that, nothing changed. Not the house, not the truck, not the newspaper. I wanted you to have a real life, he said. Not a life of handouts. I wanted to know you'd make decisions based on who you are, not what I have. I sat with that a minute. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because the answer was always going to be the same. You didn't need it to be who you are. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, the envelope I'd seen him holding that morning, set it on the cushion beside me. That's a property transfer I had drawn up last month. Part of it in your name. It was meant to be a wedding gift. I didn't open it, just looked at it. He said, "You walked out of that room for me. That's worth more than anything in that envelope." Behind us, through the ballroom doors, I could hear the low murmur of 300 voices, starting to understand what had just happened. Desmond went back into the ballroom. He wasn't trying to start anything. He had a client at one of the tables, and he wasn't the kind of man who made a scene. But he also wasn't the kind of man who sat on something like that when the right person asked. The right person asked within 5 minutes. Businessmen in the same room tend to know each other, or know of each other, and the name Walter Aldous, if you knew where to look, was tied to a 2017 transaction that had made the trade press out of Toronto. 15 minutes after Desmond walked back through those doors, 2 people had already searched the name on their phones. Within 20, the information was moving table to table, the quiet, deliberate way. Important information moves between people who understand what it means. Graham's phone buzzed. He looked at it. A message from someone who'd been seated near Desmond's table. 6 words. Did you know who his father is? Graham stared at the screen, searched the name. The first result was a piece from a Canadian commercial logistics trade newsletter. In 2017, Aldous Equipment Group was sold for $410 million in a landmark private equity acquisition. He turned to Pauline, showed her the screen without a word. She took the phone, read it, looked up, set it back on the table. Around them, the room kept making noise. People at other tables tried to piece things together, leaning in to listen. That particular electric hum of a crowd realizing the story they'd been watching wasn't the one they thought it was. Pauline Hargrove stayed completely still. Her hands rested on the table, both of them trembling slightly. Davis saw it from 2 seats away, looked at the phone screen, said quietly, "Mom." She didn't answer him. Brielle found me in the hallway about 30 minutes later. My parents had gone upstairs. I was still sitting in the seating area by the window, jacket off, staring at nothing. She'd been crying. Her mascara held. Everything she'd done for the wedding stayed in place, but her eyes were red and she kept fussing with the sleeve of her dress. She sat across from me. "I didn't know she was going to say that," she said. "I believe you." She looked up. "I didn't set it up. I didn't. It wasn't something I planned." "Brielle," I said steady. You smiled. "I was nervous. It was a reflex. I know, and I did know. I'd been turning it over for the 40 minutes since it happened, and I knew exactly what kind of smile that was. Not cruel, not deliberate. Just the smile of someone who felt for one unguarded second, relieved that some pressure had finally broken. Ugly as the release was. That was the part I couldn't get past. "I asked you about this months ago. I told you exactly what I needed. You looked me in the eye and promised you'd handle it. And when it mattered, you looked at the table and smiled." She was quiet a long time. Then she said, "My mother had an arrangement with the Whitlocks. It's not that I wasn't going to go through with this, but she kept, I know about that too. She went still. I heard them talking, I said, a week ago, in the kitchen. The hallway was quiet around us. Somewhere through the walls, the muffled sound of a wedding winding down in a way nobody had planned. I don't think you're a bad person, I told her. I think you're someone who'll always choose her family when it matters most. And I can't build a life with someone who looks at my father the way yours does. She didn't argue. That, more than anything, told me what I needed to know. Take care of yourself, Brielle. I picked up my jacket and walked to the elevator. My father's phone rang at 9:17 that night. He looked at the screen, then set it face up on the little desk in his hotel room so I could see who it was. Pauline Hargrove. He let it ring twice, then picked up. Mr. Aldous. Her voice was different, slower. The warmth that usually wrapped around everything she said was gone. And what was underneath was just a woman who'd done the math and landed on a number she didn't like. I think there might have been a misunderstanding today. There's no misunderstanding, Pauline, my father said. Calm, not cold, just finished. You said exactly what you meant. If I had known who that man was, that's exactly the problem. He ended the call. He set the phone down on the desk, looked at it a moment, then walked over to the window and stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the lights of the valley below the hotel. I sat on the edge of one of the beds, still in my dress shirt. Watched him. He wasn't enjoying this. Nothing in the way he held himself looked like satisfaction. He just stood there like a man who'd already said what he needed to say, and had no interest in saying anything more. After a while, he turned around. You doing okay? He asked. Getting there, I said. He nodded. Found the TV remote, clicked it on, flipped through until he landed on a fishing program. Sat down in the chair by the window. We didn't talk much after that. Just sat together in the room, TV low, the mountains outside doing what they do regardless of any of it. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, things happened to the Hargrove family that I only connected later. Graham had a pending commercial development deal with Whitehorn Capital Partners, a mixed-use project on the east side of Calgary, financing somewhere around $28 million. He'd been 4 months out from closing it. After the wedding, the emails stopped getting answered. Not rejected, not denied, just no response. His contact at the fund had been reassigned. The new contact was extremely polite and extremely unreachable. The deal went into review with no defined timeline. Pauline sat on the advisory board of a local arts foundation, the kind where having your name in the program means something. She was asked, without much explanation, to step down that fall. The foundation's largest anonymous donor had quietly expressed concerns about the direction of the advisory structure. Nobody told Pauline who the donor was. Davis lost a referral client, a relationship he'd had for 2 years, a family that had bought and sold property through him reliably, that suddenly moved to a different agent. He never found out why. None of them ever knew for certain if any of it connected back to my father. That's the thing about Walter Aldous. He wasn't a showy man about it. Things simply flowed the way rivers do because of what's upstream, not because of anything visible on the surface. What I know is this. My father didn't plan any of it. He wasn't out to ruin anybody. He was just a man who existed in certain rooms, and those rooms had weight. Sometimes that's enough. 3 weeks after the wedding that never happened, I called the firm in Halifax. The position was still open. The hiring manager said he'd been hoping I'd reach back out. I told him I was interested. He said they could have an offer to me by the end of the week. I thanked him and hung up. I drove out to my father's place that weekend and told him over supper. Lorraine made a beef stew, the kind she made for occasions when she figured a person needed something to settle them. My father listened to all of it, then said, "You should have taken that 2 years ago." I laughed. First time I'd laughed in 3 weeks. Felt something coming back to normal, a little at a time. After dinner, I sat at the kitchen table while Lorraine washed dishes and my father read the paper. The same table I grew up at, the same kitchen. The curtain over the sink still had the same pattern it had when I was 12. I watched his hands on the newspaper. Big hands, the kind that look like they've done real labor, even though most of the work he'd done over the years had happened in boardrooms and conference calls. He'd built something real, and never once felt the need to tell anyone about it. Not me, not the neighbors, not the people at the bridal shower who saw a rented suit and decided they knew the man wearing it. I sat with that a long while. Before I get to what happened after, I want to ask you something real. Have you ever had to choose between the person you were building a life with and the person who raised you? Because I stood at that exact fork, and I didn't always know which way I'd lean. Tell me in the comments. And if you've stayed with this story the whole way through, thank you. I mean that. I moved to Halifax in October, brought a suitcase and the envelope my father had given me, still unopened. Halifax in the fall is gray and damp off the harbor, and surprisingly easy to disappear into. I like that. I needed a stretch of time where nobody knew what had happened. Found a place in the North End, small good morning light, an easy walk to the office. Bought a coffee maker, set it on the counter, and went back to work. The new job was harder than the old one, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. My father flew out in February, told me he was coming. Didn't ask. Just said he'd be there on the 14th and asked if the airport was easy to get to from where I lived. I told him it was. He said good. Showed up wearing the same thing he always wore. Flannel jacket, good boots. Looked around my apartment, gave a small nod, said, good light. That afternoon we walked along the waterfront, south toward the bridges. Cold out, sky clear, the harbor that flat winter color. We walked mostly in silence, the comfortable kind, the kind you earn. At some point I asked him about what he'd been carrying since that night in October. Why didn't you ever tell me any of this? He took a few more steps before answering. He wasn't searching for the words, just giving the answer the room it needed. Because I wanted to see who you'd become without it. And? I asked. He looked at me. I'm proud of you, he said. 3 words. Said plainly, no ceremony, the way he did everything. I didn't answer, didn't need to. We kept walking. The harbor moved beside us. The city carried on overhead. There's something I've thought about a lot in the months since. Not the dramatic parts, not the ballroom, not Pauline's face, not the quiet phone call to the hotel room. Something smaller, the curtain over the kitchen sink back in Saskatchewan. My father and Lorraine never replaced it. The same curtain I used to stare at as a kid eating breakfast. Faded a little at the top where the sun hit it. My father could have bought 10,000 kitchen curtains. Could have replaced the truck, the house, the furniture. He had the means to do it twice over and never once thought about it. He wasn't faking humility. He wasn't hiding from anything. He just decided at some point that the life he wanted to live didn't require any of that, and he lived it fully without ever once looking back to see if anyone approved. I think about what I got wrong in those 2 years with Brielle. Loving her? That was real, and I'm not ashamed of it. The mistake was staying past the point where the truth was already clear. I kept giving her the benefit of the doubt because I wanted the story to turn out a certain way. That's on me, and I own it. What I didn't get wrong was that table in that ballroom. I wasn't wrong the moment I stood up and said what I said. I've been told my whole life, without really hearing it, that there are things you don't trade away. Not for comfort, not for convenience, not to keep the peace at a table, full of people who've already decided what you're worth. The man who taught me that was sitting in the 9th row, behind a marble column. In a rented suit and shoes he shined himself. He was the most valuable person in that room. He always had been. People ask me sometimes if I regret how it happened. The moment, the room, the 320 people. No. Not because of what I found out afterward about my father. Not because of the envelope, or Desmond Cale or whatever, quietly happened to Graham's deal in the months that followed. Those things are part of the story, but they're not the reason. The reason is simpler. My father was 10 feet away from me when someone called him trash over a live microphone. And the only question in that moment was, what kind of man am I? I gave the answer I could live with. Everything else came after. I opened the envelope in my apartment in Halifax sometime in March. I won't tell you the number, but I sat with it a while, then folded it and set it on the desk. Went and made myself a coffee, stood at the window looking out at the street. My father called that night, asked if I'd opened it yet. I told him I had, asked what I thought. I told him it was a lot to take in. He said it was mine to do whatever I wanted with. Then he told me about a fishing show he'd seen the night before. That's Walter Aldous. That's him. I don't know what happened to Brielle. Heard secondhand the Calgary deal with Whitehorn never came together. I wish her well. I mean that. As for me, I've got a good job, a small apartment with good light, and a father I call every few days, who still reads an actual newspaper at his kitchen table. That's the whole story. Have you ever had to choose dignity over comfort? Or watched someone you love get dismissed by people who had no idea who they were dealing with? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone, all of them. And if this one stayed with you, share it. Somebody out there needs to hear it today.